I had the opportunity to interview PJ Raval, the acclaimed documentary filmmaker whose past work includes Trinidad, Before You Know It, and Colorganda. He also served as cinematographer on the Academy Award-nominated documentary Trouble the Water. His most recent film, Who We Become, documents the lives of three young Filipino American women as they forge unexpected connections with their families while grappling with their emerging political consciousness. It's distributed in partnership with Ava DuVernay's Array Releasing and is now available to stream on Netflix in the US, Canada, UK, New Zealand, and Australia. Stay tuned for my chat with PJ. Thanks for speaking with me today, PJ. Did want to start the interview the same way the film does with the word kapwa. So how would you define that? And from your own perspective, how does Who We Become embody this?
Yeah, thank you for that. So, kapwa is a Tagalog word, which is one of the languages of the Philippines. And to be quite honest, it doesn't fully translate into English. But what I kind of feel the how best describes the word is togetherness, shared identity. There's been some very beautiful and poetic definitions, such as "I am because you are." And really, it's this idea of a kind of community, or the way that I kind of even think about it is like an unbreakable bond between people of Filipino descent. Um, and so for me, it became a huge guiding principle and inspiration in the making of the film Who We Become, because it really is about this idea of a collective experience. Um, and this idea of differences between people, but still a closeness and a bond. Um, and so for me, the word also, I think, most immediate definitions usually refer to these ideas of family, but for me, it also extends to this idea of community, friendships, um, and maybe even in some circles, the concept of like a comrade, right? Someone who shares a kind of belief and experience. And also in the Philippines, in Tagalog, we have words like kasama, which is meaning someone who kind of goes with you, rides with you, like with you. So for me, it's all about these things.
So, three of the people who rode with you along this journey were, of course, the subjects of your documentary, the three young Filipino American women that are activists in their communities. How did you first discover them, and when did you first know that they would be a good fit for this documentary?
Well, thankfully, the first two that you meet in the film, Lauren and Monica, I actually already knew. And so when
Hmm.
I started making this film, I kind of quietly sent out some emails to different colleagues and friends saying, "Hey, I have this new project idea. Who, is interested in hearing more?" And thankfully, both Lauren and Monica were immediately interested and excited and enthusiastic. And so as you meet them in the film is also kind of how I started filming, which is very early on, right at the emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic. We start following Lauren, and then we start following Monica around the time, right, leading up to when George Floyd was murdered, right, shortly after. And then thankfully, the producer, Cecilia Mejia, who's also an amazing, Filipino American woman, producer, filmmaker, she knew Jenna Maravilla, and so introduced me to Jenna, and Jenna thankfully became, the third in our trilogy.
So, it was so fascinating to see this documentary and hear their stories. I'm really interested to know, this film, documents such a pivotal moment in, what will go down for the history of so many people's lives, but it happened during the pandemic. And I can imagine for you as a filmmaker, that must have been perhaps stressful, hectic when you're getting ready to make a film and suddenly the world shuts down. So, what was it like to, have to kind of pivot with this project as you were making it? And I just kind of want to hear about your creative process as, you realized, hey, I'm making this documentary and now there's a global pandemic going on.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason why I love documentary and nonfiction storytelling is that it is unfolding, right? It really is this idea of examining the life unfolding in front of you, through someone's experience and how they're navigating through that. And one of the just kind of life lessons that I've learned from being a filmmaker working in documentary is how to kind of navigate through unpredictable situations and really just think about at the moment what's important to capture and how these moments later um, may seem one way, but in later we'll reflect upon this moment and really understand its significance, right? So for me, when the pandemic hit and started emerging, um, ironically, as things were shutting down, I was, feeling that urge and inspiration to create something because I knew we were experiencing something that would be huge and momentous, right, in all of our lives, and it really has been. I kind of joke with some friends and say, "Oh, I grew up at a time that was pre-internet, and I saw the change, right, in my growing up from before there was really the internet to the internet." And I kind of feel the same way. There's going to be a little bit of an experience of people remembering before
Mm,
what the COVID-19 pandemic was like and after, right? Now that we start having these ideas of what it meant to be in social distancing, things shutting down, the politicization of it all,
mm.
right? So yeah. So to answer your question, yes, I think making documentary films has helped me understand how to navigate and pivot through unpredictability and really focusing in the moment of what's happening and understanding the importance of it and how best to hopefully capture that and understand it for what it is. So this project, when the pandemic hit, it became very clear to me how much more necessary and urgent the situation was in terms of capturing it.
So, as far as your collaboration process with your subjects, were you, giving them specific conversations you wanted them to record, or was it just kind of a thing where you saw what they recorded and kind of went with the flow?
It was a little bit of both. I mean, for each of the protagonists in the film before, and this is usually the case of any documentary that I make, I'll just sit and talk and chat and hang with the person and get a sense of who they are and what's going on in their lives and let them understand what I'm interested in, right? And I think they'll probably already figure that out just because naturally I'm very inquisitive and want to learn a lot about their lives. So I'll ask them a lot of questions. What do you think about this? Or what's this like? Or how do you feel about this? Um, so when we started the film, or when they all agreed to participate, I kind of initially gave them almost like a homework assignment. Like, okay, well, what about this? I would love to see this. Could you do this? And I think the teacher in me also kind of went a little bit into teaching kind of mode where I even created like almost assignment sheets saying,
Mm,
okay, well, these are some things to think about. These are some ways to capture it. These are some just physical settings, in terms of the
mm.
technology that you're thinking of using that might be helpful to think about in ways to capture this. And then we would just check in regularly, whether that be a phone call or a Zoom call. They would tell me what's going on, and then I would just chat with them. So it was really fun. It was really a
Mm.
collaborative kind of experience, but it was also just rooted in a nice friendship, right? Just being able to
Mm.
have an exchange of telling, one person telling the other person, like, this is what just happened to me. Yesterday I saw my parents and this is what we talked about, and this is how I feel. And me being like, oh my God, I've had this experience similar. Like this, what do you think about this? This is how I feel about it. What do you think? Okay, great. The next week, if you feel like filming some of that, please do. So it was really kind of a fun kind of collaborative exchange.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's kind of like they become these sort of mini DPs as well. So kind of different roles going on. The documentary really focuses on uh, the divides among these generations of these Filipino families and the ideological differences that occur amongst them as well. Really fascinating subject to explore, especially right now for people, with their families home for the holidays. And, I have to wonder from your perspective, how do you think that generations of a family can learn from each other when there is that ideological divide and still stay connected as a family?
I mean, I love that you are referencing the holidays because that really was one of the inspirations behind it too. Was I think specifically here in the United States, I think collectively we kind of have this narrative of someone goes home for Thanksgiving or Christmas and gets into a fight with their uncle or their dad about politics, right? And there's a real explosive kind of situation, or maybe even people saying that they're estranged from their family, or it's a very tense and a time for them when the holidays really are supposed to be this kind of, warm, celebratory, kind of loving situation. But that's not the reality for everyone, right? So for me, it was something that I thought a lot about, and specifically in Filipino culture. Um, a lot of the culture of the Philippines and many other cultures outside of the United States are these concepts of multi-generational households, right? So you kind of have a family home and you have all the different generations growing up within that home, whether it be the grandparents, the parents, the children, and as people mature, maybe one of those children will still remain in the home and their children now will kind of do that. So even this idea of having some kind of intergenerational space, right? It's sometimes a physical space in the Philippines. But specifically now, as a Filipino American living in the United States, that's not so much part of the American experience, right? The American experience is much more, some of the narratives are you grow up, you turn 18, you move away, you're on your own. It's all about independence. And you only come together kind of for these holiday moments. So it's interesting as someone who's Filipino American to see specifically the Filipino American community kind of navigate between those two, right? Like the concept of the multi-generational household and the concept of having this kind of independent, um, separated kind of experiences and lives. And so the holidays become this moment where it gets really kind of, entangled, in my opinion, in a great way, right? Because you have like all these families kind of coming together and you kind of see it. And for me, that is what's really special also and unique about specifically the Filipino American experience, right? And I think the reason for me, I was interested in following the three protagonists is because I think all of them do such a beautiful job at kind of navigating that space, right? Like being able to stand in their kind of individuality in the way that they think and believe, but then also navigate the space and being respectful to the family and listening, right?
Mm.
Not only speaking but also listening. And yeah, and so for me, there's something there that I think speaks uniquely to a lot of communities of color, a lot of children's
Mm.
of immigrants, right? Where we're kind of recognizing that we're in these spaces that our parents come from elsewhere, grandparents come from elsewhere, and they might have a more multi-generational kind of household. And we're here and we're kind of bridging that kind of divide between the two.
And, really fascinating just to see the level of humility and respect and kindness and love that, these families have for each other. One of the, things about this documentary that really stood out for me as, some really powerful moments are when we hear the poetry from Jenna. And it's really powerful to see the ways that art expresses and drives her activism. Was wondering, what role do you hope your art can have in inspiring activism and social change?
Um, Thank you for that. I do want to give a shout out because Jenna, I just spoke with her the other day, and I think she's just about to publish a
Hmm.
new poetry book. So if anyone is interested, please, you could probably go to our website, and we'll definitely have a link there. You can find us on social media, who we become, who we become .com. We'll have a link to her poetry there. Really beautiful stuff. Um, because I think it speaks so much about her just experience, right?
Mhm.
Like it's so personal. And for me, there's a similarity there. I think with this film, maybe it's a little bit more obvious that a lot of the films that I'm creating are very personal, right? Like for me to embark upon some kind of storytelling, some kind of project, even though it might take place elsewhere, a very different visible identity to mine, there's something that speaks to me, right? And it's probably because it's something that I've felt or something that I've lived through myself. Um, there's something there, right, that kind of connects me to it. Um, so for me, the idea of you know capturing these stories, being able to present them to the world, really is my way of kind of contributing to these ideas of social change, right?
Mhm.
Because I do, on one hand, I also want to just educate people and say, I think you know what it's like to grow up in the United States, but have you thought about it from this perspective?
Mhm.
You know, I also want to give people the opportunity to see themselves. As someone who grew up here in the United States with, at the time, a very glaring absence of any kind of experience on screen that reflected my own, um, I want to also just give that opportunity there. But then also, in a third way, I also just want to motivate and inspire people somehow. And whether that be to just think about your own life and think about your own actions, think about speaking to your own family, thinking about the actions that you do that affect other people, I think is a really important thing to do, right? Because I think sometimes when people watch films, or we hear stories, we don't think they're connected to us, right? We just think like, oh, this is a story about, these three Filipino women in Texas. I'm not Filipino. I'm not from Texas. But then when you watch it, hopefully you start thinking, well, I've been in these situations before too. I've experienced this. Like, oh, wow, I feel really inspired by seeing what this person is doing. Or, oh, I'm thinking about my own family right now and the way that, myself and my mother had this conversation once and it didn't go well, but look at this. Right. So in a way, I'm hoping also, that the stories that I'm telling in the films that I'm making can kind of contribute to that change as well.
Yeah, and it was a documentary that I really felt for the subjects presented, and I think art can be an inspiring force for empathy, and I think you did a great job of conveying that. So I want to thank you so much today for speaking with me today, PJ. And yeah, and the documentary is on Netflix. Anyone watching, check it out.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me. And thanks for this great interview.